Welcome to Essentials Explained. This video is our Excel 101, which covers the absolute foundational building blocks of Excel. If you're brand new or a beginner, this is the perfect video to start. If you're an intermediate or advanced user and you find this video repetitive, feel free to jump ahead to the next video in our course. Let's jump right in. So let's talk about the fundamentals of Excel. What is Excel? It is a spreadsheet. What that means is it's comprised of different columns and different rows. The intersection of one of these columns and one of these rows is called a cell. Every single cell on your spreadsheet has a specific range address. What this address denotes is the column and the row where that cell is located. So the first cell we're looking at, range address A1, is in the first column, column A, and the first row, row 1. Your columns will be denoted by letters, and your rows will be denoted by numbers. Excel has stored this range address in the top left of your workbook in case you ever lose your place. Every single cell on this worksheet has a different range address. If we move our column over to column G, or our row down to row 13, this cell would have a different range address, which would be G13, which denotes the column is column G and the row is row 13. Excel has structured all of these cells in a very simple table format with over 1 million different rows and over 16,000 different columns. You have over 17 billion cells to work with within a single worksheet. A worksheet is the next level of hierarchy that sits above a cell. A worksheet is comprised of all the different cells within its tab. And then above a worksheet sits a workbook. A workbook can have multiple worksheets within it, which help you structure your analysis in a clean, concise way. The easiest way to understand this structure is that your workbook is the file you are working in. So it can be book 1. Within the workbook is the worksheet, which is your tab you are working in. So this could be the tab called raw data, or it could be called sheet 1 or lookup. And then within any worksheet, you will have cells with specific values. And so this is the value for your total, or a number value, or a text value. Let's talk about how Excel deals with calculations and formulas. This is a very basic example of Excel utilizing a arithmetic operator. You have different cells being added together, which gives you a total. 1 plus 2 plus 3 is equal to 6. You can use Excel as a simple calculator and add numbers together. The easier way to use Excel is to use pre-built formulas. Let's look at an example of how to use a formula. A formula in our same example, Excel has realized instead of adding together all these numbers separately, what you might want to be able to do is reference the array as a range. In our previous example, very easy to add all these numbers together, much harder where you might have 1,000 different cells. And so if I use the sum formula, I can just use the sum of the range, and that will give me the same exact result as referring to my cells individually. This is what is called a formula. So let's talk about opening Excel. So when you open Excel, they'll give you either a blank workbook, which is where we'll spend the majority of our time, or they do have all these different templates in here. I have not used these a lot, but if you're looking for something very specific, like a loan amortizer or a calendar or a budget, Excel probably has something that may be a good starting point. I wouldn't recommend using it as your very first option of learning Excel because you probably won't understand how these were built or all the stuff in there, but helpful to understand these are there in case you're looking to start with something that's already partially built that you are able to flex. Let's jump into the blank workbook because it's really helpful to start from scratch before jumping into anything that's pre-built. So now that we understand the core concepts of Excel, let's jump in and let's look at the application so we can understand what we're talking about. So Our really basic hierarchy is we start with a cell. So this is cell C4. It is sitting on the worksheet, sheet 1, in the workbook, book 1. Helpful to understand the hierarchy and how different parts of Excel work together. I have all the different cells on this worksheet. I can add different worksheets, so I can have sheet 4, I can have sheet 5. I can rename these worksheets. So if I want to call this worksheet sheet 18, I can do that. And if I want to rename my file, I can rename my workbook to whatever I want. You can either do that with File, Save As, or F12 is a handy little shortcut to rename your file or to save as. Let's orient ourselves to how this application works and how we can find the key functions and formulas we want to utilize. Up here are the different tabs. So Excel has stored different tabs at the top of your ribbon. In this home tab, you're going to find most of what you need: insert, draw, page layout. I'm not going to go through all of these, but important to understand how to toggle across your different tabs and what's within them. So within our home tab, we can see Excel has put a number of these different buttons and drop-down menus for us to work with. I'll put in some random text here. So this is text, which we can use to walk through some of these buttons. Undo, redo, very important. Undo will remove what I just did. Redo will redo what I just did. You can also use shortcuts. So Control Z will undo, Control Y will redo. Excel will give you these shortcuts when you hover your mouse over a specific section. So Control Z to redo, to undo, Control Y to redo. Again, copy paste. This is going to be very important. I can press copy. I can press down here. I can press paste. I can also use Control C, Control V, and that works. Excel has shortcuts for everything. So copy is Control C, paste is Control V. Again, you can see it in the dropdown. One quick distinction: I have copied these. That will retain the value in its original cell. Control C, Control V. If you want to not leave a value in its original cell, you can use cut, which is up here. Cut, paste will remove this value from its cell. You can also use the shortcut, which is Control X. Control V will paste a value into a different cell. Let's say you want to use formatting. You can change the font to something different. You can change the font size. You can make this bold. You can make this italic, underline, add a border, add any real number of combinations of borders. You can change the fill. You can change the text color to something that fits your fancy. These are all options that Excel has given you, right? You can change the alignment of the cell. So you want it middle, you want it aligned to the left, you want it aligned to the right, you want to add an indent. You can do all these things from your ribbon. But let's say this isn't giving you everything you need. Excel also has these pop-out options, and it will pull up this additional menu with additional functionality that Excel couldn't fit into the ribbon, because the ribbon is really just the highlights of Excel. Let's say you wanted to do a strike through and you wanted a double underline on your cell. You could do that, and Excel will give you that functionality. It just doesn't think it's a popular enough option to include in your ribbon. So it stores it in this Format Cells option. You can either access that menu by clicking this button here, or Control 1 will pull up that same menu. Let's say I wanted to get rid of something in Excel. You can hit delete, and that will delete the value from your cell. But what it will do is it will retain all this formatting. So if I put in another text string, it'll keep all this formatting for me. Let's say I wanted to remove that formatting. I could come over here to this erase option and hit clear. I could either clear the formats, which would retain the text string, or I could, if I undo that and hit clear all, it will clear everything from my cell. So a couple different ways to do that. I'll hit Control Z. Let's talk a little bit about how to utilize this top ribbon with shortcuts. So far, I've just been clicking options with the mouse, so I can hit clear, clear all, Or what I can use is the Alt key. Alt will pull up these little black and white figures which tell you where your different shortcuts are located. So if I press H, it will now give me the shortcuts for all of the options on my Home tab. If I were to hit Escape and hit N, Excel will give me the shortcuts for all of the different options on my Insert tab. If I hit Escape again and hit A, it will give me all of the different options for my Data tab. So the first letter after you hit Alt will denote the tab of the function or formula you want to reference. So if I press Alt H, I can now access all of the different options on my ribbon. If I hit E, I've now accessed the erase menu. And within that menu, I have a number of different options. If I hit A, I can clear everything. Control Z, Alt H E F, and that will just clear formatting. Or Alt H E C, and that just clears the contents but retains the formatting. So different options Excel will give you and different ways to access them. So Control Z, I could also come up here, clear contents. Many different ways to do things in Excel. Find your personal preference and what works for you. You can certainly use the mouse and click wherever you want. I've found it is faster in the long run to learn shortcuts and will be the fastest way to use Excel. We have now talked about the ribbon, how to access it, and how to access it with shortcuts. Let's talk really quickly about number formats. If I put 100 in this cell, I can go up here and I have this option. This is in general. If I wanted to make this a percentage, I could put percentage, I could put currency. I could also use these buttons here. So I could say accounting number format, I could say percentage, I could say add commas, which doesn't do anything. But if I were to add, let's say another 0, this would show me a comma. If I change this back to general, I would not have this comma. I personally like the comma, so think this is helpful. You can also change the number of decimals Excel shows. So decrease decimal, increase decimal. Those are really some of the key highlights of understanding the ribbon, and we will hit on a number of these different functionalities in later videos. I will delete all of this. Alt HEA will clear all of your contents from your cells. And let's talk about Excel's Smart Fill. So if I put 1, if I put 2, maybe I'm trying to make a list and I want to write 3, 4, 5, 6. Instead of writing all those out, if I highlight these cells and drag down, Excel will figure out, hey, you want an ascending list of numbers. You probably want to fill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Excel is smart enough to figure that out. I can also do that with years. And if I put 2018, 2019, if I highlight these different cells and drag down, Excel will figure out you want an ascending list of different years. I'm going to hit Control Z because what Excel can also do is instead of dragging this down, you can double click this bottom right section and it will automatically fill in your different values you want. Excel has this smart fill functionality. Let's say I want to do that in my rows and I have different stores. I can put store 1, store 2. I can highlight these and I can drag across and it will give me store 3, store 4, store 5. Let's talk about how I've been navigating through Excel. If you put a value, so if I put 3 and hit enter, it will move me down one cell, right? I've gone from C13 to C14. I've moved down one row. If I put a different cell, so if I clear this and put 3 and hit tab, it will move me right one column. So I've moved from C13 to D13. If you want to move backwards, so if you want to move up one cell, Shift Enter will let you do that. And if you want to move left one cell, Shift Tab will let you do that. So Enter to go down, Tab to go right, Shift Enter to go up, Shift Tab to go left. That is one way to navigate. Another way to navigate is to use the arrow keys. So arrow right, arrow down, arrow left, arrow up. Excel has given you the functionality to move large distances on the spreadsheet. So let's say you need to move 50 rows to your right. Instead of clicking right arrow 50 times, you can use control right arrow. and it will take you to the next cell that has a value. So if I were to move down to cell B18 and hit Control Up, it would take me to B11, as B11 is the first cell that has a value. If I were to move over to cell H11 and hit Control Left, Excel would put me in cell C11, as that is the first column that has a value. This is helpful for selecting ranges. So if I want to select all these years, I can hold Shift up, up, and select my whole range. Or what I can just simply do is Control Shift and select the range in one single click. Helpful to understand how to move about your sheet and how to select different ranges. You can also do this horizontally. So if I put my cell in D3, use Control Shift right arrow, I have now selected my entire set of store numbers. We previously copied and pasted individual cells, but you can copy and paste ranges as well. If I copy this, Control C, pasted it here, Control V, Excel will paste my whole range. Very, very helpful. If you wanted to paste this range vertically instead of horizontally, you can use Paste Special. Control C will copy the range, Control Alt V will pull up the Paste Special menu. If I click on Transpose, it will flip my store numbers. So if I wanted to change this and maybe change this whole table, what I could do is I could highlight this whole table, Control C, paste down here, Paste Special, Control Alt V, Transpose, and now I've just flipped my table and I have my store numbers as my rows and then my years as my columns. Very, very fast way instead of recreating your whole table. I will clear this. And now let's talk about referencing specific cells. I'll make these all bold and underlined so it's very obvious what are my headers and what are my cell references. I'll also just add a little gray up here so I really know these are my headers and these are my cell references. You can refer to cells with equals and then the range address. So equals C4 is equal to 2018, equals store 1 is equal to store 1. I can drag those formulas. So if I drag this down, this will still say C1, but the range addresses change and I'm linking to a different cell. If I take this cell and I drag it to my right, this range address will move with my cell to the right and will reference store 2, store 3, store 4, store 5. One thing I've done is I've filled to the right and I've filled down. So you can either copy this and then paste in individual cells, or you can copy this, you can paste it to a range and copy them all at once, or you can highlight the whole range and press Control R. And what that will do, I'll show that down here, Control R, and it will fill the first value in your cell across. So this cell is equal to E5, F5, G5, H5, because it's taken this formula and dragged it across. I can do the same thing if I take this formula, which is referencing E5, I select this option and I press Control D, it drags this formula reference down. Helpful for understanding how to move and repeat your formulas across your sheet. So let's assume in this example, we want to create a table that has a combination of our year and our store number. What I'm going to use is use a formula. Excel has built formulas to make your life easier. So one thing I could do is I could select this cell and I could use the ampersand, which denotes a concatenation. And I could go up and select cell D3. What Excel will do for me is return the value of these two cells. So it will say 4 and then D3. So return 2018 and store 1 and put those together. If I wanted to insert some text, I could write simply quotation mark, text, close the quotation mark, ampersand, and then Excel would say 2018 text store 1. I can put whatever I want in here. So text whatever would return 2018, text whatever, store one. This is one way to concatenate strings, but again, Excel has written formulas to make your life easier. So if I put equals concat, I can put 2018. I can select quotation mark, text, close quotation mark, store one, and I've accomplished the same task. That I find to be a little bit easier, but you can solve this problem whatever is easiest for you. Let's say I dragged this formula to the right. So I'll select the range, I'll press Control R, and now Excel has taken this formula and dragged it to its right. The problem with this is I actually don't want this concatenating formula, so in cell E4, to be referencing cell D4. I want this cell reference to remain in cell C4. I want it to still be referencing 2018. As I'm now getting this repeat of what's in cell D4, so what I need to use is an absolute reference. What that will do is if I put a $sign in front of cell C4 and drag this to the right, now you can see this cell reference has stayed in column C and is not dragged over with my cell. Excel uses these $signs to denote absolute references and will leave your range addresses stuck in place. If I drag this cell down, you can see this range address is still moving because the $sign is in front of the column identifier, column C. If I were to put a $sign in front of the row identifier, row 4, and drag this down, you will see Excel has kept this range address in row 4. So understand when you want to use these absolute references with the $sign versus using relative references without the $sign. Will be very, very helpful as you build your formulas. Two quick shortcuts here. F2 will let you jump into your formulas. So you can double click here and write in them. You can click in the formula bar and write in them, or use F2 to automatically jump in and write into your formulas. If you click on your cell and write text, it's going to overwrite everything in your formula, which oftentimes you do not want. What you prefer to use is F2, which will let you come into your formula and change it. Let's say I want to keep my year reference in my column C, but I want it to move across rows because I want to be able to reference 2019, 2020, etc. What I can do is I can either manually write these $sign references, so I could delete this, I could add a $sign, or what I could use is the shortcut F4 will toggle between your different selections. So this is a purely relative reference, meaning it will move columns and it will move rows as the cell moves. F4 will give you a fully absolute reference, which means this cell will not move columns and it will not move rows, even if the cell moves. Relative reference in your columns and absolute reference in your rows, meaning it will move columns but won't move rows. And then an absolute reference in your column and a relative reference in your rows, meaning it will not move columns and it will move rows. For this example, what we want is we want it to stay in its column but be able to move rows. So $sign in front of the column identifier, relative in front of our row identifier. We can do the same thing with our store reference. We want this to be absolute in our row, but flexible and relative across the columns. If I hit enter, and maybe I'll actually just put a space here instead of the text, I can now copy this format and paste it all throughout my table. And you can see it's referencing the right header every single time. And I didn't have to go through and rewrite this formula for every specific instance where I want to reference a different header or a different cell. Make sure you understand this concept and are very familiar with how these absolute and relative references work. We will use these a lot in this course. One other thing I did was I updated the column widths. So let me just go back. You see how these column widths are probably too big. These column widths are too small. What I did was I highlighted all of these cells. I can highlight them with my mouse, or I can just press at one cell and use Control A, which is the shortcut to select everything. And I went up here to Format and Auto Fit Column Width. That way Excel will automatically have all your different column widths. Control Z, you can also access it with a shortcut, right? Alt H, O for format, I for auto fit column width will do the same exact thing. Control Z. So last way to do that, if you select all of your columns and just double click on one, it'll also do that for you. So Excel, many, many different ways to do things. That will be a common theme. So let's say you want to take this table and you want to add a header, and you want to call this table header. And this is sitting right here, but you want this to be centered across your table, so it's really obvious this is the header. What you could do is you could go up here and use this merge and center option, and that will give you a merged cell across your different table. You could come up here, you could format this black, you could change the color to white, you could make it bold, you could make it italic, or any other formatting preference you want to. This is one way to do that. So my recommendation is actually not to use merge cells, as if you want to select a column, which you can do with Control Space, and you see how I've selected the whole column. Shift Space will also select your rows. So two handy little shortcuts there. If I selected this full column, Excel's going to force me to select all of these columns, as this is a merge cell. And so Excel has no way of knowing I only run a reference column F, but thinks anytime you reference this whole column, you want to reference column D through H. I found that to be sometimes difficult to work with. So my recommendation, and I'll just show you how to unmerge cells. You can come up here and click unmerge cells, and that also will work for you. If I hit Control Z, you can use shortcuts. Control H, M, U will also do that. You can come up here and select your desired range, press Control 1, go up here to alignment and use center across selection. This will return the same result, but now when I select my full column, I don't get that annoying merge, right? I did that with Control 1. If I hit Control Z, I can also come up here and click alignment and then click center across selection. Different ways to access the same functionality in Excel. So we've talked about formulas and how Excel uses formulas. Let's walk through a really quick example of how to use these tactically. If I had a value column, and let's say I'll have a product column, and I'll call this product A and product B and product C. I can have a value of 1, of 2, of 3. If I want to return the sum of these, I can just put equals sum and select them. One quick shortcut you can also do is Alt plus sign will auto sum cells for you. That is a helpful one and definitely good to know. But what if you only wanted to get the sum of one of these values, right? I'll maybe copy this and just put it below. Maybe I just copy this formatting. So Control C, you can paste special just formats. Control Alt V, formats. We'll just paste the formatted cell option up there. One quick way to quickly format your workbook. And if I actually only wanted the sum of product A, how would I do that? Because if I came down here, maybe I used Alt plus sign, I get 12. One way you could do that if you used individual formulas is with an if formula. And I could put equals if this product is equal to product A, I want to return the value in this cell. If not, I want it to be equal to 0. I will fill that down. And now I can see I have the value for product A and a 0 for my other products. If I change this to maybe product B, you can see I have the value for product B, but I don't have the value for any of my other products. If I did a sum of this array, this would be the total of my product B column, right? I have 2, I have 2, that adds up to 4. Maybe I'll just make this bold and add a top border to make this really, really obvious. But this is one way to do it. Excel has figured out, hey, this is not the cleanest and a little bit annoying to have to deal with. So maybe we should have a formula that lets you do this automatically. And what they use is called a sum ifs. So sum ifs will let you easily calculate a sum range, a criteria range, and then a criteria. So I'll just call this product B. And that gives me 4. Because what Excel has done is they've said, we'll build in this formula for you and make your life a little bit easier. So here's an example of formulas working together and being able to utilize a very, very common, very repeatable task that Excel has enabled you to do very quickly and very efficiently with an existing formula. So the specific structure of these formulas we'll cover in more detail later in the course, so I wouldn't over-index on that. But what's important is understanding why Excel has included these formulas and how they work together to achieve a task that any user would want to use. If you're interested in understanding how if statements work, the core logical operator in Excel, please check out the next video in our series. Otherwise, thank you for joining us at Essentials Explained, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.